Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Solid topic today. Let's go for it. What's your small town murder mystery? Please remember to like, share your own, and subscribe. The Stovetop Murder. In northern Ontario in the 40s, four men got it into their heads that an old woman had a bunch of money hidden in her house. They broke in at night and tortured her for the money's location by pushing her face onto a hot stovetop. She didn't have any money and died later at the hospital. 3 of the men were hung and 1 got life in prison. 30 years ago, dude has that affair. One time, they met at a company party and got into a fight. She then said she will tell his wife about them. He got mad and killed her that night. He took her to a quiet place nearby the party and strangled her to death. After that, he got a shovel and buried her there. Next day, some people from the company found an arm sticking out of the ground. He was too drunk to bury her entirely, so they caught him, and he got 9 years in jail. He visited us after getting out. Little me, 9, had absolutely no clue what's going on though. Just heard small pieces of the story. Anyway, the sister of the killed girl also was there. It was a damn coincidence. They tried to talk, but it ended with her crying and running 20 kilometers to her home. Another city. Within the last few years, guy got home from work and walked into his house with his wife and kid and blew them away with a shotgun. Then there was a couple guys who dragged someone down to the railroad tracks and sawed the guy's head off. There's been more, but these are definitely the 2 that stand out. In the 90s, I went to elementary school with Kirsten Hatzfeld, an 8-year-old girl who was abducted from her bedroom while she slept next to her 3-year-old sister. The girl's mom was on drugs and hung out with sketchy people, so the community wrongly assumed her mom had something to do with her disappearance. In 2015, Kirsten's neighbor, Anthony Palma, was arrested for her abduction, sexual assault, and murder after her bloody panties were found buried in his backyard. In 2019, 2 years after being sentenced to life imprisonment, Palma was found dead in his cell. He was murdered by another inmate. It happened outside town. There was a woman who had a lot of problems, drugs and/or alcohol related. She lived alone, had lost custody of her kids, and didn't have stable employment, so it took a while for someone to realize they hadn't seen her for a while. She was found dead. She had obviously been badly beaten and had been dead for weeks. To make matters worse, the autopsy showed that her injuries had not been immediately fatal, and she would have been alive for a period of time. I don't remember if it was hours or even as long as a day, but not able to call for help, and if she had been found during that time, she might have survived. The guy who was known to be her boyfriend was tracked down, and after initially claiming that they'd broken up some time before, he admitted that they'd gotten into a fight, and he'd beaten her up and then left. He said he'd never checked on her because as far as he was concerned, they were through. He ended up with some really bullshit watered-down manslaughter charge, and although his entire defense was, "I didn't think I beat her up that bad," he was acquitted. She was pretty much treated as disposable. So he did it, gave some BS excuse, got charged with manslaughter, and then got acquitted. Justice is blind. In Fallon, Nevada, this guy murdered his wife in 1985-ish. Fallon, Nevada is a semi-big, but more on the small town side. Anyways, he dumped her body at the end of a large irrigation channel. My former coworkers told me that she was found by the irrigation district in the large willows and brush near one of the large structures. She had been there for days, from what I was told. Her husband, I think, had shot himself at their home. Now, we would have to work as ditch riders and check the waters at all hours of the day and night. I would get this creepy feeling when I would have to do a water measurement check at that same location between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. I always had wondered why it felt spooky there for some reason. I never said anything for the longest time until another coworker mentioned that it was spooky there. I asked him about it. He felt like it was there too. I mean, we would have to walk there in the dark with a flashlight and do our checks. I said yes, I would hurry up and walk back to the work truck as soon as I was done. I later found out about this story from the coworkers who had been there still when the incident occurred. I often would get an ugly feeling that someone was going to run up behind me or something. That was a little unnerving after I found out about that. In the early 90s, 2 Satanists were arrested, convicted, and almost put on death row for a murder. Over 20 years later, their convictions were turned over with new DNA evidence. During the request for a new hearing trial, evidence came out that the video of their alibi was taken home by the detective and accidentally recorded over. No other suspects were ever looked into, including someone that possibly confessed and might have been a serial killer operating all over the US during the late 80s and early 90s. They eventually had their convictions vacated, which almost never happens in the US. I actually don't know if this was in my city, but one of my grandfather's sisters, he had like 13 siblings, was beaten to death in her apartment building, and no one ever found out who did it. I think everyone was suspicious of the neighbor because they was just a creepy man. In 1988, William Mellon, the man who owned and ran the general store in the very small town of Milliken, Oregon, was murdered and shot to the back of the head. Not really a particularly remarkable story, except for the fact that Milliken was such a very, very small town. So small, in fact, that the official population was 1, William Mellon. And then after his demise, the population of Milliken was 0. Grew up in a university town, attended same university. Not a murder, but it was a pretty chilling event. My sophomore year, a freshman went missing after going to a frat party. Searches were organized and for a week nobody found him. It was weird because there didn't seem to be any reason he'd be gone. Somebody saw him walking up to his dorm, then nothing. A maintenance worker was doing some routine checks and found him electrocuted in a maintenance area. He'd evidently managed to drunkenly obtain access from the outside to this area and fallen into the high voltage equipment. The worst part is that the room was checked during the searches the previous week, but from the opposite side, and he wasn't visible. It was one of the first areas checked, as it was in his dorm building. Not small town, but neighborhood. Lady had a boyfriend. He went to jail. I don't remember what for, and she broke up with him. Years after, when he got out, she had already moved on and had another partner, and he wanted revenge. He knocked on her door when she was home alone and stabbed her multiple times until she died. She was a mom. It was a failed murder/successful suicide. Dude was an asshole to begin with, then came back from Iraq, first one, even more effed up than he already was. I don't know what the fight was about, but he shot his girlfriend who lived and made a full recovery. Then himself, who didn't. My home country has a beautiful waterfall up in the Appalachian Mountains near the county line. We used to go swimming there all the time. Found out a few years ago that 4 people are missing who were last seen at or heading to the waterfall. Only one body has been found, enough evidence of foul play that they're sure it wasn't an accidental death. Attempted murder, suicide, and a murder. Grandmother loses her marbles, I guess, instructs granddaughter to consume an entire bottle of prescription medication. She took some, but then sought medical attention. Grandmother shoots grandson in the head with a .38 caliber pistol. Grandmother sets house on fire. Fire department and police respond and find the grandson. While the grandson is being treated in the hospital, grandmother completes suicide by jumping off a parking structure. Grandson passes from complications from the gunshot wound and injuries from the fire. Just a terrible series of events. Sorry for that entire family. Just horrible. No murder story where I live, but police were looking for a while for this guy that killed someone about an hour away, and he was hiding from police at my neighbor's. Was staying just 2 apartments over from mine. I went to take my dog out and saw like 20 cops just congregated outside their door, so I went back inside and just watched through my blinds for about an hour. Didn't find out the story till a couple days later. In my very small town, 1996, a bar fight broke out between 2 sisters and their boyfriends. The older sister's boyfriend shot the younger sister's boyfriend in the head on the street in front of the bar and in full view of everyone. One of the friends of the shooter hid the gun. I was at that bar about 30 minutes before the fight broke out. I heard later that the bartender from the other bar in town a block away had to run down there to assist the victim because she was a paramedic. She also happened to be the shooter's ex-wife. Not quite a small town, but a suburb. Father killed his entire family and then himself. This was right before school started, and the whole situation was uncovered because teachers and friends of the kids noticed their absence a few days into the start of school year. Apparently, the father was in some deep financial trouble, but ultimately we really will never know why it happened. Really tragic. A police sergeant killed his wife. He was involved in an affair with a barmaid and looked to benefit from life insurance money. He beat her to death with a truncheon and then tried to fake a car crash to cover it up. He was only caught because the investigating officers got suspicious of the driver's seat position. It was too far back for the wife to have been driving. I live in the capital of Missouri, about 40,000 people. We don't get murders too often, and when they do happen, they are premeditated. Most recent was a lover's triangle. 22-year-old was dating the 17-year-old's ex, and he didn't like it. Told the 22-year-old, "I'm going to come there and kill you," to which he doubted. 17-year-old showed up and shot him the moment he opened the door. This was about a 2-minute walk from my house at the time. My dad's best friend killed a coworker at work. He tried to dismember the person in an abandoned house next to a building during work hours. He then drove around into the night and eventually dumped his body in the woods along the coast. He got home and was pretty much immediately arrested. He then wove this story of paranoia, where he said he had been drugged for a week at work, and it was all a conspiracy to frame him because he witnessed the body be hidden years before. It was super convoluted. Truly weird mixture of sadness for both people to be on the other side of an investigation like that. The weirdest part was my mom had always thought he was weird. She would ask to not be alone with him. We brushed it off as him being kinda goofy, and that's all. We were wrong as hell. Karate school owner and instructor and his wife were murdered by their adult son. One of my best friends in high school was always talking about what a great teacher he was. The only one that taught karate in town, I believe, too. I think the guy tried to set fire to the house after he did it, and that is how they caught him. It was a few blocks from where I lived and walked by all the time. I don't exactly know what happened, but the paper described the son as having a lower IQ and all that, and that they got into an argument and he killed his parents. Small town, 1,000 people. One guy shot his girlfriend. The big one was a guy was shot, rolled up in a carpet, and burned just outside of town. Some crazy brothers were suspected, but it was never solved. Years later, one of the older brothers got released from death row for a different murder, got a big settlement, and was on Oprah. Used to party with them, and although the burn dude was never brought up, there's no doubt it was them. Crazy effing family. I mean, we don't know for sure that this family or that brother murdered this person and rolled them up in a carpet and burned them. But I mean, if you were convicted of something, then got away with it, I don't know. Seems sketchy. Down the street from where my mom lives, this girl's partner was arrested and then later her. Police received a tip-off about a murder they had been investigating. The couple had murdered a guy, decapitated and removed all limbs, then dumped the limbs in some bins in the torso off a windy back road. Not sure about the head. I believe it had something to do with drugs. Her boyfriend got mad over missing money, then had her help chop the body up and dispose of it. I had met the girl out on the town once and got really weird, scary vibes from her, like she wanted to fight or was angry. Weird vibes to the point it stayed in my mind for years. Then saw on the news she had been arrested for this. Interesting. When I was a toddler, an old woman we knew didn't turn up to her volunteer work at the local community center. That was unusual, and the other volunteers got worried she might have fallen. So people went to her home to see if she was okay. The poor woman got her head bashed in with a hammer in her own home. Her wallet was found in a stream nearby. It's been about 35 years, and still nobody has been arrested. It's suspected that because she always told people she came from an important foreign family, and she had a title someone assumed incorrectly, there would be a lot of money or valuables in the home. There was a national TV show a few years ago about unsolved murders, each episode about a different case. They told the whole story, asking for any leads. Haven't heard anything after that. I would not say that the city is small, but the murder thundered throughout the country. A pedophile killed a 3rd grade student who studied at my school. I was in the 10th grade then. The killer caught her when the girl was walking through garages. In Russia, it's not uncommon for many garages located inside urban developments. Through such garages, the girl usually went to school, then hid the body in the garage. One was occupied by a pedophile. Through the second, he made a tunnel to the third, abandoned garage, where the body was found. The corpse was found after some time, and people demanded to hand over the killer to the crowd. In order not to lynch him, the police dressed him in their uniform. He's currently serving a life sentence. My hometown was pretty small, and everyone seemed to know each other. In the early 90s, the big story was the yard sale murder incident. One road over from me, a guy was having a yard sale, and one of the guests started arguing with him over the price of some item. The guy wouldn't budge on price. The guest got uppity, a yelling match ensued, and the guest dropped dead from a heart attack. The homeowner was arrested and charged, even though there was no physical contact. Of course, the story was warped by anyone and everyone, and at any given time, there were 3 to 4 different versions of how the murder went down.